This is Join Us in France, episode 277. Bonjour, I'm Annie Sargent, and on today's episode of Join Us in France, I talk with my friend Elise about a city in the southwest of France called Limoux, Limoux. You never heard of it, you say? Well, I had heard of it, but I don't remember ever visiting it. Elise and I both live in the southwest of France, and as a licensed tour guide, she's taken people to all these amazing places where most tourists never go, and apparently some locals don't either. Limoux is a city of about 10,000, not far from Carcassonne. So if you're exploring the southwest of France, this is another great stop for you to add to your itinerary, where you can enjoy genuine France and really get to know the country. If you'd like to get in touch with Elise to book a tour with her or ask her further questions, email elise@joinusinfrance.com, ELYSE@joinusinfrance.com. I wanted to go and take pictures of Limoux, but then everybody in France was asked to stay home to help reduce the spread of COVID-19, and I never went. So hopefully someday. After my chat with Elise, I'll update you on what's happening in France and in my life with regard to the pandemic. And show notes for this episode are on joinusinfrance.com/277. That's the numbers 277. And if you're planning a trip to France, the site is chock full of great resources. You should check it out. This is where I normally read a new review of my Paris self-guided tours on the VoiceMap app, but nobody is taking those tours right now for obvious reasons. But if you're listening to this after the pandemic is over, check out my tours on joinusinfrance.com/audio tours. And I'm working on adding photos to the tours. So if you've already bought the tour and you'd like to take it from home, which you can do, you will be able to download it again. I'll give you instructions in next week's episode. And so you download it again, and then you can push play, and then you see photos as well as hear me talking about the places. So that'll be a little improvement. It's not as good as being there, but, good enough for now. Bonjour, Elise.
Bonjour, Annie.
We are together again, having tea and chit-chat.
Tea and chit-chat. Lovely thing to do.
That you don't want to hear, you listeners.
No.
Some of it is not.
Some people out there might have already guessed, Annie loves to talk, and so do I.
Anyway, so today we're talking about a town that I am afraid I know nothing about.
Shame.
Even though it's not very far from Toulouse. It's Limoux.
Limoux.
L-I-M-O-U-X. L-I-M-O-U-X.
Which locals do actually sometimes call Limoux, because the people who come from there are called the Limouxins.
Limouxins?
Yeah.
How weird.
Well, there's Limousin, and then there's Limouxin.
Right. Yeah. So it's not very far from Toulouse. I mean, it's like a little south of Carcassonne.
It's a little south of Carcassonne. It's what is called a sous-préfecture, which means that in each department in France, you have one city that is the head of the administration for that city, and it turns out that is in fact Carcassonne. And Limoux is one of the two sous-préfectures. It's a town of approximately 10,000 people.
Yeah, it's not very much.
It's not very much. But what's very interesting, I was thinking that we should say is that we'll do a second podcast about other things in the Aude, because this is a department of the Aude, not Ode as in Ode, O-D-E, which is a nice poem song to your loved one, but Aude, A-U-D-E, named for the river.
Yes.
And I was looking at the map yesterday as I was taking some notes, It's a fairly big department, and I guess even
geographically,
yeah.
Yes,
and hadn't really thought about it. Maybe I knew it, but didn't realize it. When you look at it, it covers the territory from just west of Castelnaudary, which is a town that's only about 35, 40 minutes from here, going east, southeast, and goes all the way to the Mediterranean. It's a very big department, and it covers a lot of different.
Brahms is in the Aude. I'm pretty sure.
Brahms is Lézignan, sur Corbière,
yes.
Narbonne,
yes,
which surprisingly is bigger in population than Carcassonne, but is not the prefecture.
Oh.
So Carcassonne. So the two cities that we've actually talked about at different times are Narbonne and Carcassonne. And
they seem quite far apart to be in the same department.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And they are. And the department is basically one that goes a little bit, just a teeny wee bit north of Carcassonne into the big foothills of what are called the Black Mountains.
Yeah, La Montagne
Noire. On the west side. And then south it goes into the Corbière area, which is where the famous wines of the Corbière are from. And it's very much the Mediterranean climate and very limestone and vineyards. And then as you go windy. And as you go further east, you have more and more vineyards, both north and south. And it covers all of that territory. And so it covers a big territory. And I guess it never dawned on me that it was really quite so large. And it's not a huge population in any one place.
Right.
So Carcassonne and Narbonne.
See, I would have thought that Narbonne was in the Hérault. C'est dans l'Hérault.
Right.
No?
And
it's not.
It's not. The Hérault starts just a little bit north of Narbonne. Basically. So you have the sea, you have the mountains, you have a little bit of kind of almost dry, almost semi-desert kind of climate. And as I'm sure some people probably know already, Carcassonne is just about an hour from Toulouse.
Yeah.
And so Limoux is just, if you add on another 10, 15 minutes, when you sort of do a turn off going south, you go from Carcassonne and you can get to Limoux.
Right. So if from Toulouse, you'd go to Toulouse, Brahms, and then you head south.
You can take, exactly. You can do, actually, there are two ways of going. You can do the autoroute and then just turn south. You get off on one of the exits and go heading towards Limoux. Or, and I've done both, you can take a very picturesque route if you have plenty of time and you want to really have a nice day's excursion of driving around. And you avoid the autoroute and you go on the roads that go south.
Right, La Nationale.
And you head into these very beautiful departmental roads because it's very hilly. It's very beautiful and it's vallonné. And you see the beginning of the foothills of the Pyrenees from
So this
area.
is a part of France that doesn't have a heavy population.
Right.
It doesn't have any... like Toulouse, we have Airbus.
Right.
Aude, I don't know that they have a big manufacturing presence.
I don't think so. I mean, Carcassonne, of course, has its administrative offices and an army base. That's the big thing in Carcassonne. Narbonne also has a lot of commercial activity, and it is on the coast.
Yeah.
And it's an intersection of many, many different roads that go north, south, east, west. But basically, the Aude is agricultural.
Yeah.
Lots and lots of vineyards everywhere. Really, it's one of the most important industries in the department.
Right.
And tourism.
Right.
And tourism.
I know about Vin de Limoux.
Right, which is one of the things, of course, we'll talk about.
We'll talk
that I knew you would know about.
Et la Blanquette de Limoux.
Right, exactly. And
I know all the food and wine. There you go. I've got it covered.
That is really what most people know, unless they've actually visited Limoux. But since it's an area that is very, very touristy in a good sense, in that as soon as the weather gets warm and nice, it's very beautiful. All of this part of the Aude department, as you head a little bit further south, is very beautiful. It's a kind of land that I particularly love, which means you have grapevines, you have pine trees, you have cypress trees, you have little gullies, you have nice curvy roads and all of that. And so it is indeed an area, a fairly large area, that has castle ruins. The whole area is filled with interesting things. that are very non-city.
Right. So when you say it's touristy, it's nothing compared to the Eiffel Tower. It's
No.
It's not the same type of touristy.
No.
We're talking
Country touristy.
Right. Country people go there on vacation. Probably
You rent a house. You rent a room. You rent a house. There are like a gîte there. Lots of beautiful, teeny little villages.
Right.
Very old historically. Very, very old area.
Right.
And in fact, that's a perfect segue. Limoux, the name, this is stuff, of course, I all didn't know about ahead of time, but this is what happens when I do all this research.
Can I take a guess?
Yeah, go ahead. You will. I bet you a chocolate bar. You will not guess right. Here we go.
Okay, I think the name Limoux has to do with the limestone, the stone.
Well, not really. But you know what? I'll give you a square off the chocolate bar. How's that? How's that? I'll give you just a square
All
or
right,
two.
I'll
Okay.
take it. I'll take
You'll
it.
take it? Okay. Well, it's not too bad, Eddie. It turns out that because Limoux and the area is documented going back to the time of Charlemagne. Okay, so we're talking the 700s, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's an area that really has a very, very long history. And so the word has been researched. You know, there are crazy people out there who spend their lives trying to find the origins of different things. And some of them are trying to find the origins of words. And they think it comes from an ancient word that belongs to the Tectosage, the Volk Tectosage, which were the first tribes of the Celts that lived here in this area before the Romans arrived.
Okay.
And the word comes from a word for mud.
Mud. Oh,
Yes.
I wasn't so far
You
off.
weren't that far. And the reason why, and this is something that, of course, has to do with the actuality of life in this area, is that because it is an area that is very much limestone and has lots of little rivers. Now, for those of you who might not know about this, if you come from an area that has a lot of limestone, it means that at one time, a long, long time ago, it was under the sea. And it also means that the rock is very porous. It also means that the soil is relatively filled with calcium. And this is an area that in the summer can be very, very hot and dry, which is great for grapes, but it floods a lot in the fall and the spring. Mm-hmm. And the Aude River is a river that floods regularly.
Yes.
And there are villages and towns, including this past year, the city or town of Limoux, that suffered enormously from the floods. And when the floods arrive, it brings the silt and the mud up onto the banks of the river. And so it became the root of the name that was given probably in its original form as almost a nickname, because nobody knows really what the original name was to this town. But it was basically like saying, you know, like, oh, I'm going over to Muddy, you know, I mean, something like that, you know. And so what that tells us also, interestingly enough, is that in spite of the fact that now everything is connected to climate change and everything else, this has been a problem for several thousands of years.
Yeah. Right. So this type of land is very good for growing olive trees,
Yes,
grapes, anything that doesn't need a rich soil.
Exactly. And doesn't have to hold it in for very long.
Right. Because the water comes and goes.
The water does indeed come and go.
Right. Then you, like maybe citrus trees if it's hot enough. I'm not sure.
I don't think I've ever seen citrus trees there, but what you do see is you can see a little bit of apricot and peach. It's not a big industry there. I think you have to go a little bit closer to the Mediterranean. But definitely it's the most important thing is the grapevines that are there and the olive trees, the olive trees. Yeah. So, but this area that Limoux is in, which stops just about, Limoux is really, I don't think it's more than maybe 10 miles south of Carcassonne now. But in the ancient times, that is the times starting with basically Charlemagne and when he created an empire, and, he's the one who created this business of making a nobility and dividing everything up into small areas and in the feudal system. So you're going to be a count and you're going to have this area. And then you, of course, take in a certain amount of money and you pay me a certain amount. But you can rule this area. Right. So this area is called the Razès.
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 How would you spell that?
R-A-Z-E accent Graves.
Razes.
The Razes.
That sounds definite.
Yes, and this is the Razes, and it is really known today for being an area that has wonderful wines. Really wonderful wine. Not just the Blanquette of Limoux, but basically, if you hear people talk about the Corbière, that's also part of this area nearby. But the Count and the Viscounts were the Counts and Viscounts of the Razes area. So when you drive through this area, because it's also connected to the Qatar, and I know we've talked somewhat about the Qatar and everything. This is also, of course, to attract tourists, and they have signs now everywhere about things like this.
Yeah.
But you will see things like a village will have the name of the village, and then it says blah, 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 de Razes.
I see.
So it is really a designation of a region. There's no longer a viscount or a count,
right.
But it's still considered to be basically the name of the area. And it is, so it's, as I mentioned, it's got about 10,000 people. Interestingly enough, if you look at the demographics, I thought that was also very interesting. In 30 years ago, there were only about 7,000 people.
Okay.
It's attracted a lot of people.
Yeah.
A lot of retired people who move south to small towns like this that have every service you need and that isn't too far, for instance, from a bigger city like Carcassonne. A fair number of English people live in this area as well who have bought houses, although now with Brexit, I have no idea what's going to happen. But it's really very interesting. Now, the city of Limoux itself is pretty much in a it's like at the bottom of a little valley, and it is the intersection of the river of Aude, as we've mentioned, and a very small little river. And here we go, Annie. This is one where you can tell me how to pronounce this. It's Cougougne.
What?
Okay.
Spell, please.
Couou.
Couing.
G-O-I-N-G.
Cougouin.
Cougouin?
Cougouin.
Cougouin.
Yes.
Okay, here we go. Okay. So that's why it's muddy, because you have to say Cougouin.
That's how I would try it.
Okay.
But of course, like all of these names,
who knows?
Who knows how the locals say it?
No. But anyway, so you have the Aude, which really cuts Limoux, the city of Limoux, in half. It runs right through it with three very beautiful medieval stone bridges that cross over to the river. And it intersects with this small river that empties into the Aude. And that is one of the reasons why there are very often floods right in the center of Limoux. It really does happen fairly often. The town is surrounded by vineyards and garrigue.
Yeah, garrigue, bien
and
sûr.
The garrigue.
Garrigue is it's kind of a windswept kind of land.
Smells good.
Smells good because lavender and thyme and rosemary and all of these plants
very Mediterranean.
They will thrive
right.
in those types of areas. They don't grow huge. Like I have a lavender outside and I have a tarragon, and they get huge if you water them. But if in those kinds of environments, they usually stay shrubby.
They stay
short.
fairly shrubby,
Yeah. But they're everywhere.
And then
so
they have this
really
little
good.
bush with this flower called the immortelle. I have no idea what it would be called in English. It smells wonderful.
Yeah.
If you like Mediterranean vegetation and a Mediterranenean climate, that's what you have around Limoux.
Sounds good to me.
It's very, very nice.
Yeah.
Now, the village itself, I shouldn't call it a village. 10,000 people is a small city, I guess.
Yeah.
Okay. It was begun as a town to be built up around an abbey. Okay, so this is again, we're going back to the 700-800s, and the abbey. The ruins of the abbey are still there. They're about 3 miles outside of the actual city center.
Okay,
and that is the abbey of Saint-Hilaire.
Saint-Hilaire. Okay, so the abbey folks were a little smarter because they didn't go right where it floods.
Exactly. They knew how to handle things.
Yeah. Okay.
Right. And in the 10th century, the counts of Razes. I don't know why I like that word so much.
Well, it's like an interesting
It's an
sound.
interesting thing, right? They came under the protection of the Viscount de Trencavel of Carcassonne, my hero.
Trencavel, yes,
my wonderful hero. And so they were under this still feudal system. They were under the protection of Carcassonne, and which meant they paid legion, I think that's how you say it, to the Viscount. And it was
allegiance, you mean?
Allegiance, yeah, I guess that's
I don't
what you
know.
say, yeah. But, and it was indeed starting in the 1000s and up through to the end of this very tragic period in the history of this part of France. It was a center of Catharism.
Yeah.
It was a very important center of Catharism. And just as a reminder out there, folks, it was really a reform, separate Christian movement that took hold in this part of France. And we should probably do a podcast just about Catharism.
Yeah, we should. And we've mentioned that
really
a few
should.
times.
Yeah,
and
we should.
the thing is, recently there's been a lot of newer historians. In the 50s and 60s, a lot of lore was developed around the Cathars, and it has turned out by newer historians who actually go to the records instead of making up nice stories. That a lot of that was just lore and just stories. That it's not grounded in anything that we can call genuine history because they can't verify. They don't have written records.
Well, I don't want to really contradict you completely, but it is a fact that the Catholic Church did keep records, and so I have 3 books at home that are really scholarly books that talk about the.
But it depends when they were
documentation.
published. It depends when they were published.
No, this is writing from the time. That is, this is when they had trials of the Qatar and things like that.
Oh, yeah, there were trials, there were burnings, there were lots of
What
things.
we do know is no one knows really what they were called. I mean, this is a term that was given to them recently.
The lore was around their religion.
Yes, but the religion has a lot of, there are a lot of things that we do know now that really is documented about them. And then there is, of course, the difference is that in the last 25, 30 years, because it has become a tourist attraction in the southwest of France for things to be called Qatar country. Mm-hmm. So a lot of other things have developed around them, which includes the Dan Brown books and the book by Tracy Chevalier and things like that, which add to the lore, which add to all of it. There's a kind of mystical
that's what I
quality to
meant.
it.
There's a lot of lore that has developed around it.
But it is a fact that it really was an area that is the region that would now be considered to be Occitanie, that did indeed have a separatist movement, very much like 300 years later, the Protestants versus the Catholics, and did create a situation of war, which was very bloody, and really involved the destruction of lots of towns at a time when a big city was just 5,000 people, and there were lots of little villages everywhere. And it turns out that Limoux was taken over by Simon de Montfort, who was, of course, the head of the king's army at the time, after he had taken Carcassonne. And he destroyed the ramparts that surrounded Limoux, which had ramparts built around it. And the city was basically destroyed by his troops. And once there was a certain calm that came back to the area, because what happened at the time was that this man, Simon de Montfort, who was basically in charge of the king's army, right? He had all of these, his officers, which maybe we could call generals or whatever, and he would give them, once he conquered a certain area, he would give them the title to that area, which is how they managed to basically move into control the southwest of France. And so he gave the area that is the Razès, basically, to one of his lieutenants generals, whatever you want to call them, who rebuilt the walls.
Okay.
Who rebuilt the walls. And interestingly enough, assuming that the war with these people was over, we're still in the 1200s, early 1300s. We have the English who were pushing to reclaim a whole part of the southwest of France. So there's still war. There's bandits everywhere. There's, brigands in the forests. So it's still a practical idea to rebuild walls.
So to be very general, typically the reason why French kings were oppressed these populations is because French kings were interested in getting the support of the Pope. They were interested in having the Pope support them and continue their lineage. Right. And they had other lines and other people trying to challenge them for the kingdom. And so the French king wanted to please the Pope, so he pushed Simon de Montfort to repress this new upcoming religion. And that's how we ended up with this whole problem with the Cathars, is that, and it happened it also happened with the Protestants,
with the Protestants,
as you mentioned, is that the French king wanted to stay in the good graces of the Pope. The Pope was tremendously influential and powerful at the time.
And the richest person in Europe.
Yes.
The Pope.
Yes.
Yeah. So anyway, Limoux but Limoux was very prosperous in spite of all of this. There were a couple of hundred years of invasion, destruction, and walls and things like that, because in spite of what we might imagine, at the time it was textiles, which is very common in that area because of all the tiny little rivers and lots of sheep and lots of linen. Which is a very pretty plant. If you've never seen one, it has this beautiful little lavender-colored flower on it. But it was a center of tanning of leather and textiles, and it made it very, very prosperous. So once this period of this particular war was over, it became very rich again. And then we have the Black Prince. Mm-hmm. Oh, boy. And this is the English guy, and what he was doing was he wanted, as a descendant of Eleanor of Aquitaine and the King John that she married over on the other side of that thing called the Channel over there, he was trying to reclaim a good chunk of the Southwest as belonging to England.
Right.
And when he could not arrange any kind of marriage or anything that would give him a more princely claim, he just sent his brigands to pillage, and they really did pillage in the southwest of France. And it lasted for a number of years. And poor Limoux actually went through all of this. And then in the 1500s, the same ditto for the Protestants and the Catholics. And interestingly enough, maybe because there's, it is a fact that there are certain places, I don't know about the north of France, but certainly here in the southwest, that have had this heritage of being rebellious that goes centuries and centuries and centuries.
Yes.
So the same thing happened with the Protestants and the Catholics that happened with the Qatar and the King of France. And that is, first, it became a Protestant stronghold and was attacked by the Catholics. Then the Catholics took over and it was attacked by the Protestants. And for a period of several years, the city basically was decimated by all of this war. It's hard to imagine, I think, when you haven't lived through periods of time like this. Sometimes it makes me wonder how people manage to survive.
Yeah.
Because if it was first one faction that took over a town, then another faction took over a town. Meanwhile, you have the people who are making the textiles, the people who are tanning the leather, the people who are making their little wine, and everybody just wants to kind of go on living their lives. And they have to do this in the middle of people tearing down the ramparts, tearing down this, building this again.
Yeah, it must have been very hard. So I just barely released a French history brief, which is something I do for Patreon, and it was about the Cahier de Doléances, which happened right before the French Revolution. This is when French people were asked, Louis XVI asked French people, what would you like done differently?
Right.
And one of the big things that came up was that they wanted this whole religious persecution to stop. Because people were tired of being in the middle of this just constant upheaval over religions. Because again, the king had an interest, the nobles and the kings had an interest in pegging people against one another.
Right.
That's a control mechanism, right? Whereas the regular people, they just wanted to carry on with their lives. They were tired of it.
Right.
Like, if this guy wants to be a Protestant, let him be. I don't care, They even stood up for Jews, and we didn't have that many Jews in France at the time. But, they were like, leave them alone.
Yeah.
Like, stop. We don't want to see people being dragged out of their homes and stuff like that. So it was one of the things that came up at the French Revolution, is this sense of just being sick and tired of the powerful manipulating the people with religion or ethnicity, or, mostly it was religion at the time.
But I think I would bet that there was more of this sense of I've had enough of this in the south than in the north of France.
Oh, it's possible.
Because this region that we're in is really a region that many, many times in the last 2,000 years has revolted against the oppression of whatever group was really in charge.
Yeah.
And there is this sense that, leave us alone.
Yeah.
There's just this real sense here in the Southwest of leave us, maybe in Provence as well. I'm not sure, but definitely we're far from the central power. And even with the nobility, there was lots of nobility that at the time was basically, I really just want to be left alone in my little area here, And it's very true. And so this is what makes it interesting, is that by the time of the French Revolution, there was absolutely no fighting or destruction in Limoux. So it was basically like, whatever, we've had enough.
Yeah.
We've gone over to, whatever is going to happen, it's going to happen.
Right.
Let us just live our lives. And this is what I think is so fascinating. So here is a town, because of its geographical situation, that has basically been dominated by the textile industry for centuries and centuries, and it's starting after the French Revolution that it switches over and becomes wine that is the more important thing. And I don't know why. I mean, it would be interesting commercially. I have absolutely no idea why. But what has happened...
Maybe it was good.
Well, it was good. So this is the thing. So now we can actually talk about the wine.
Yeah.
Because starting in the 19th century, Limoux really becomes famous again for its wine. And it turns out that in the 1500s, before the invention of champagne, the most famous naturally sparkling white wine in France that was exported everywhere out of the country to even England and Spain was the Blanquette de Limoux.
Yes.
And it was because the monks at the Abbey of Saint-Hilaire had discovered by accident that there was this natural fermentation, and it was with the Chardonnay grape. And this is the process that the monks from the Champagne area came down and discovered and took it back up to the Champagne area and started using it. So this is what they still, I think in French, is called the méthode champenoise.
Yeah.
And it actually began in Limoux.
Huh.
And so in the 1500s, the king did not drink champagne. He drank the Blanquette de Limoux.
Nice.
And it is a very lovely, much less expensive white sparkling wine. And it is made from Chardonnay and Mauzac, which is a grape variety that grows particularly here in the Southwest.
How do you spell that?
Mauzac. Mauzac.
Okay. Never heard of it.
I think it's actually also a little bit in the Gaillac wines. And Chenin Blanc.
Chenin Blanc. Yeah.
Chenin Blanc. And, little anecdote, Thomas Jefferson brought back to the States 600 bottles of the Blanquette de Limoux because he considered it to be the most delicious white wine he had ever tasted.
Well, there you go.
So there you go. So starting...
A man of good taste.
Man of good taste. Starting in then the early 1800s, right after the Revolution, this became the center of the economic activity of Limoux and has basically stayed that way ever since. It is the very first sparkling wine to receive an AOC, which means that it's got this prestigious appellation d'origine contrôlée.
Yeah.
You can explain, Annie.
It's just the vintners get together and decide on standards.
On the standards.
So to be called Blanquette de Limoux, you must follow these standards.
Right.
And they have a list, and if you don't follow that, you get kicked out.
Right. Now, if you go to visit Limoux, you have lots of different caves. There are lots of different producers of Limoux that open up their houses, so you can go in and do the tastings. And they're on the roads that lead into the city center. In the city center, there is a center with the history. There's a little museum of the history of the wine, because it is really central to the history of both the abbey and the town. And then you have this very famous carnival, which is the Carnival of Limoux, which predates all the other carnivals in France and goes back to the 1500s and is considered to be the longest lasting carnival in the world.
Interesting.
And why it lasts that long, I have no idea. But it begins...
Because it's fun.
But it begins just after Christmas and goes on through to Easter. And what happens is this. There are groups of musicians that have names. I guess it's in some way similar to the Carnival in Rio, where there are groups by neighborhoods that have floats and things like this.
Yes,
Except that this is not floats. What it is, and this is what people flock to see every springtime. You have groups of musicians that are formed that have names. Now, it could be by the neighborhood of Limoux or one of the outlying villages, or it could be by different groups of winemakers or different trades. I'm not even sure how they formed.
Right.
But each little group of musicians has their own distinct costume, and they wear these masks. And they're not like the masks, if you've seen pictures or if you've ever been to the Carnival in Venice, for instance, that are kind of scary masks, with these very strange things that are kind of monster looking. No, these are white masks that look more like Pierrot.
Okay.
Which I don't know how to explain about Pierrot, but
it's a white face.
It's a white face, painted with like a harlequin, with the red lips. And so the masks are all white with slight differences on top to indicate which band or which group it is.
Oh, okay.
And they every weekend for 12 weeks perform in the big square that is in the center of Limoux, and they do this parade with miming, and you can participate in it, which I did once in my life, or you can just come and watch them.
So is this on like every weekend?
Every weekend, every Saturday and Sunday, 3 times a day. It lasts for about an hour or so.
Huh.
And of course, right now, because it should be on today, but because
Monday.
Not today, yesterday. It should have been on yesterday. Whether it was or not because of the current thing with the virus, I actually do not know.
Yeah.
But it goes right through to Easter Sunday. And the culmination of it is actually on Easter Sunday. And it's fabulous. And it's very strange because they play these instruments and they do this very strange kind of dance and they move this movement thing. And it's very mesmerizing.
So this kind of reminds me of what happens in Catalonia, which is not very far from Limoux, where they also have groups like this of musicians.
Right.
And they do frequent gatherings of... so it might be related.
It's probably related. It doesn't have the games like the one where people stand on each other's shoulders, like
the towers.
Catalonia.
Yeah.
It's mostly music, but it's very, very famous, and it is considered to be the oldest one of its kind, and it's fascinating. And of course, what happens is when they have the days where they do this. They have stands outside where you can have a nice glass of Blanquette de Limoux at the same time. And, of course, it's in the springtime. And this area is wonderful in the springtime. Lots of flowering trees. You have the almond trees in the countryside that are flowering. You have everything. I mean,
Yeah.
It's a really beautiful time
of year. Yeah, I'm going to need to go take pictures, I think. So maybe I'll go Saturday.
And so and what else? I mean, it's a lovely town to visit. You can stay.
Medieval still or not very much?
Lots of houses from the 1400s and 1500s.
Okay.
3 bridges, one from 1327.
Okay.
Really some beautiful Renaissance buildings as well.
Can you see the Abbey? Or is
you can go to the Abbey, which is just out on the outskirts of Limoux. The church is visitable as well. It's not a very big city center, but it's very, very, very charming. It's a lovely place where you can if you go at the time of the carnival, and then of course, if you're not, you can also go and just have a lunch and just visit there and then do some wandering around in the countryside. And just as an additional thing, because it's literally only, if I remember correctly now, 3 kilometers away, the town of Alette-les-Bains.
Alette-les-Bains. So Alette, spell that one.
A-L-E-T.
Okay.
Sorry, it's 9 kilometers. Okay, it's 9 kilometers, which is 5 miles strictly south on the Aude River.
Yeah.
And it's the two of them make a lovely day excursion.
Yeah, and you can easily do that from Toulouse.
You can easily do that from Toulouse.
That's a definite day trip from
You
Toulouse.
can do it from Carcassonne. You could even do it from Narbonne.
Or Montpellier.
Or Montpellier. It's a little further away, but you could definitely do it from Montpellier. And it's a perfect combination because Alette-les-Bains, as the name indicates, is a place where there were thermal baths starting with the Romans.
Yeah.
So it's a town that has two parts. There's the part down below which has the ruins of this absolute incredible abbey. And then up above, you go, the village itself is up the hill a little bit, surrounded by hills that are covered with vineyards. And then you get to see a little bit of the foothills. If you go all the way up to the top, you actually see a little bit of the Pyrenees. You get to see the foothills of the Pyrenees. And the abbey is really in ruin, but it's visitable. And it's kind of neat because there's enough standing in terms of the walls, the columns, and the things like this, that it gives you a sense of how big it was. It was a Benedictine abbey. It was started in the 800s, in the 9th century. It was very, very powerful for a very long time. When it was the same time period that Limoux was really a very important center in the middle of the Middle Ages, where there was a lot more going on in this area than there is right now. And so I've done this 2 or 3 times. I kind of like it when you can walk through ruins and it's kind of mysterious. It's not that big, but it's neat because you kind of walk in and out of everything and you get a sense of the structure of what was there, even though there is nothing, really left anymore except the ruins to visit. And then you can go and visit the little village that is up on the hill that has many, many old medieval and Renaissance houses. And it has the baths. And the baths were created by the Romans. And so the baths are down below next to the Aude River.
Right.
And they basically join up to the ruins of the abbey. And so it's very picturesque and a very sweet place to visit. And it's one of those charming little sites. It's actually a town that I think has a fair number of chambres d'hôtes and gîtes and things like that. This is an area where it's very rural but very pretty, and
so there are visitors in the
yes,
season, depending on the season.
Exactly.
Maybe since the carnival is on between Christmas and Easter, maybe that's their high season.
That could be their high season.
Yeah.
Although I think that in the summer, in the summer here in the Southwest, and especially down there, it can get really hot, and the fact that they have the river there, a little bit. I'm not sure which direction, but a little bit up or down on the river, there is actually places where you can go into the river. I mean, the Aude can be a nice river to go in, and then it can be running too fast. But it's very, very charming. And between the two of them, you really get an idea of the geography of this part of France.
Yeah. And this would be perfect for people who are interested in slow travel. Not running around and marking things off of your list, because I'm pretty sure Limoux has never been on anybody's list.
No, but strangely enough, you know what? And also, if they have a car and they are doing Carcassonne is wonderful, but Carcassonne is a half a day. I mean, Carcassonne is not really more than a half a day. This is the perfect thing to do for the other part of the day, just go to Limoux.
Yeah.
It's not far away. You take the road, you go south, you visit Limoux. You drive through really beautiful countryside. You get yourself a bottle of Blanquette de Limoux.
Yeah.
You get a picnic.
Yeah.
And you hang out there and you see another aspect of the old hills and the old villages in the area. And it's not Limoux and Alette were not part of this famous list of most beautiful villages. They are part of the list of remarkable tourist sites in France.
Okay, yeah. Right, because to be most beautiful village, I think you have to have under 2,000 people.
I don't even know.
I think that's the rule. So as soon as you're over that, you can't be the most beautiful village, which is really stupid, but that's how it works.
So it's a lovely little part of the Aude to visit.
Yeah.
And again, you can get to it from the east, from the west.
Yeah, from anywhere.
Anywhere.
I'm going to go see that. That sounds good.
It's very pretty.
When I show up, I might recognize it, but when I was looking at pictures online, I was like, that's not ringing a bell. So maybe
you never did go.
Maybe I never did go.
And Ailette still has part of its old ramparts, but just a little bit, But they're very much connected in the history of the area. And you can get a train from Carcassonne that goes right there.
Oh, there's a train too.
Yep.
Huh.
Right. Goes right through from Carcassonne to Limoux and then on to Ailette-les-Bains.
Wow.
And it goes right into the Pyrenees.
So that's a TER. It's a
little train.
Yeah, it's a regional train.
Right.
Cool.
Yeah, but it's a very lovely little area. And then we'll wait till another podcast. We'll talk about the crazy, crazy myths in the Aude area. Ooh.
Awesome. I look forward to it. Thank you so much, Elise.
You are welcome.
You never cease to amaze me how much you can bring out of the Southwest. That I swear I was born and raised. Come on, woman.
Hey, you got to be a visitor to go and be interested in finding out about these things.
That's true. And they don't even have a museum that you didn't mention a museum?
There's a teeny little museum in Limoux. Yeah.
In Limoux?
Yeah, there is a museum.
Okay.
There is.
Did you go in?
No.
Oof. Well, that's a bad
Shame
sign.
on me.
If Elise doesn't go into a museum, it must be very small.
Well, to be honest, the last time I was there, we went looking for some blanquette.
Well, that's probably why I'm going to go. It's like I'm going to go and drive and get you get 3 bottles here, 3 bottles there.
We had lunch. We walked across the bridges, walked around the square, and I went, okay, let's go get some wine. Hey, that's what you do on a nice sunny day.
And it's really lovely wine. I mean,
it's lovely.
Yeah, it's.
And they also have a non-sparkling. They actually do. They really have a non-sparkling wine. And what's interesting in terms of just the history of the area in relation to wine is that in the last 10, 15 years, the non-sparkling wine has also developed a very good reputation.
Mm-hmm. There's got to be some food specialties too, not just wine.
Yes, there are. If I remember correctly, there's a kind of croquant.
Okay.
I don't know how you... It's a kind of like a cross between a cookie and a meringue kind of thing.
Yeah, it's
with almonds.
Yeah, it's a cookie but it's croquet means crunch.
It's crunchy, and it's very light. It's really like a cross somehow between a cookie and a meringue, and they do a very, very nice dish with lamb. Lamb. But I don't remember if there is anything more specific than that. There probably is.
Yeah, there probably is.
There probably is. And I'm sure that you, as a good foodie, will find it right away.
I will look.
You will find it right away.
Thank you, Elise.
You are quite welcome.
Au revoir.
Au revoir.
Thank you, Wu Schaefer, for pledging to support the show on Patreon this week. Patrons enjoy several rewards that you'll find listed at patreon.com/join us. I share exclusive content with my patrons, including help with your French comprehension, stories about France, photos, and membership into a secret Facebook group. And of course, patrons can message me directly through Patreon, and these messages always get top priority. Visit patreon.com/join us to see the different reward tiers, and thank you so much for giving back. My thanks also to Keisha Welt and Lachlan Cook for sending in a one-time donation using the green button on any page on joinusinfrance.com that says tip your guide. I must admit that seeing all things related to travel have ground to a halt, but folks like you keep me going and things will get back to normal soon, let's hope. Not sure if your itinerary for France is as good as it needs to be. Let me review it for you. It'll cost you $50, but you'll get a full review. I'll answer any questions you have, make suggestions on things you didn't know about. It's a good way to get ready for a great trip. And once we're done talking, I send you my recommendations in writing. Email Annie@joinusinfrance.com to set that up and write itinerary review in the subject line. And I know you can't travel just yet, but sometimes it's best to plan ahead. And if you'd like to support the show without spending a penny you wouldn't have otherwise, before you go shopping on Amazon, go to the bottom of any page on joinusinfrance.com and click on the Amazon ad. Because you came to Amazon through my site, I get a small commission and it doesn't cost you a penny more. Same thing with the booking.com ad. We're all getting more of our stuff online right now, aren't we? So Thank you so much for those of you who remember to do that. For my personal update this week, well, like everyone else, a lot of my internal life, I guess my internal dialogue, is consumed by this COVID-19 pandemic. I'm used to working from home, so theoretically it shouldn't change anything for me, but it's so hard to concentrate on work. I mean, I've started several things and I haven't been able to finish them yet. I'll get there, but it's not easy. So I want you to know you're not alone. Everybody is going through this difficult time. But I can't really complain. I live in a quiet village. We have a yard. Everyone around me is healthy. I still get to walk my dogs, although there are restrictions on where I can go and how long I can stay out. But realistically, I have it really good compared to so many other situations I hear about. Nobody in my family and friends circles is sick. Podcast fans who've emailed me or have been in touch one way or the other are all healthy too, so that's really good. And a fan called Maris Russo emailed me, and I wanted to share a little bit of what she said. Hi, Annie. I'm obviously devastated having to have canceled or postponed our trip, but the obvious is obvious all over the world right now. We must stay at home and arrest this virus. I'm writing to find out how you and your family are, and I'm hoping you're all doing okay. There must be obvious economical disruption, and we've all been thrown for a loop, as we say, but I'm hoping, as you are, that we can all recover from this, that God willing, maybe a year from now, we can travel and enjoy, even if some of our favorite places are no longer in business. That thought depresses me, but I fear it may be a reality. And yes, I agree with you. There are places that won't recover from this, although the French government is doing their best to keep everybody afloat as much as possible. And at least here, we don't have the problem of for-profit healthcare. So, we can at least get medical help when we need it for free. So thank you, Maris. We're all healthy so far. Our daughter has come home to spend the next few weeks with us, so we've enjoyed that. And the economical disruption is real, but my Patreon supporters and donors are hanging in with me, and we'll get through this, and I'm really, really appreciative of everybody's support. I would have loved to go back to Paris in March or April to complete my Latin Quarter voice map tour, but I have to go when travel is possible again, and I don't know when that is. I'll have to wait, just like all of you. But that's a small price to pay to stay healthy. There's been articles in the French press about how over 1 million people who lived in the Paris region left the area. They know this because all of a sudden, the phones of Paris customers started using cell phone towers in Brittany or somewhere else in France. That's over 1 million Franciliens. So Francilien is what we call the folks who live in Paris, in the Paris region, in French. Now, these people are all using cell towers away from Paris, and that's 1 million of them, more than 1 million. So, sure, when you're confined, it's easier to do it in the countryside, but some of these people probably took the virus to the French countryside, and they are also overwhelming local resources. There's apparently a lot of them went to Brittany, and those villages in Brittany, they don't have big grocery stores, and they don't have planned food deliveries to the grocery stores several times a day like they do in big cities. They don't have a lot of hospital beds. They probably only have the one country doctor. So the message is stay put, stay where you are. Right now, this virus is spreading quickly in the US. This is the time to encourage all Americans to stay put, stay home, don't take the virus around the country. Now, some people need to keep working, I understand that, but most of us can stay home, and we should do it even if we don't like it. It's just how it is. Around Toulouse, they've set things up so that if you're sick, you're supposed to call your family doctor, who will assess you over the phone and either write you a prescription for whatever you have that's not related to COVID-19 or send you to a COVID-19 center. They set one up a few kilometers away from my house. They set it up in a community center. This is a place where normally they do choir things and, all sorts of fun things. They've got 50 doctors and 50 nurses on staff there, and they can assess and test people and send them to a hospital if needed. I heard that they can do the COVID-19 test in 4 hours in those centers, and of course it's free. I think there's about a dozen of these special COVID-19 centers in and around Toulouse, many more all over the country. I can't give you any more details because I haven't been, and I hope not to go. But there is a system in place, and I hope wherever you are, they have a good system in place to listen to your local resources, doctor, whatever, to tell you how to handle this, and hopefully you won't get sick. So what do we do in the meantime? Well, I think we all need some distraction from the virus. And I've started so many books, I can't finish any of them because I think this whole thing is making us distractible. But I've decided to release a few of my French history brief Patreon rewards to the general Join Us in France feed. So if you're subscribed to the podcast, you'll see a short episode appear, and it'll be a deep dive into one aspect of French history or French life. If you're not subscribed to the podcast, you must do it before you get these extras. And I want to remind you that subscribe in the podcast world does not mean that you have to pay for anything. Podcasts are the only remaining digital product where you are completely anonymous. It's free, no strings attached. You don't even have to accept cookies. Think of that. I also want to thank the folks who participate in the Join Us in France closed group on Facebook, who are keeping things positive, sharing photos of their previous trips to France, and looking forward to future trips. I've been posting questions like asking you, do you know what this or that is? And I've been talking about some of the art I've enjoyed at various museums in France. I've been sharing meal ideas, recipes, trying to bring a little bit of France into your daily life as well. This is a good time to plan your future trip to France. Don't set a date yet. I think it's too early for that. But there's so much else you can do without having a date. I hope that this halt to all travel is going to convince people to travel better. Maybe not as often as they used to, but do it better. I think knowledge and enjoyment go hand in hand. The more you know about a place, the more you will enjoy it. So this is the time to make a plan on where you want to go, which is really something you should consider. As you saw in today's episode, there's great stuff all over the country. So where you want to go, then listen to the episodes pertaining to that place. Maybe listen to them again so you can take notes. Maybe read about the history. Get curious, not just about what the place looks like, but what it's all about. The local culture, the food, the wine, the history, maybe local notables, that sort of thing. Okay, I'm going to stop talking now and get ready to go on my little walk with the dogs. I'll fill out my little paper. We have to fill out an authorization to get out. We have to stay within 1 kilometer of where we live. We have to put the time when we set out so that we don't stay out longer than an hour. But I'll fill this out, make sure I have my ID, and go out around my village for an hour. And I will keep the dogs on a leash because I don't want them picking up crap along the way. Like the other day I saw somebody had dropped a tissue. Well, you definitely don't want your dog picking up some stranger tissue right now for obvious reasons. So keep them on a leash, okay? Now, it stinks that the month of March 2020 in France this year would have been perfect for travel. In Toulouse and in a lot of the rest of France too, it's been dry, sunny most days, not too cool, not too hot. Well, no, it's not been hot yet. But, we get close to freezing temperatures in the night, but it's been really mild. Oh, well, there's always March next year, hopefully. If you enjoyed this episode, I'd appreciate it if you'd share it with someone. Tell them to search for Join Us in France wherever they like to hang out online. Thank you for listening and stay healthy by staying home. Send questions or feedback to Annie@joinusinfrance.com. Have a great week at home. Make the best of this time at home, hopefully with your family. Stay healthy, and I'll talk to you next week. Au revoir. The Join Us in France Travel Podcast is written and produced by Annie Sargent and copyright 2020 by Addicted to France. It is released under a Creative Commons Attribution, Non-Commercial, No Derivatives license.